Chapter 2. Holly woke up. She wasn't sure why she woke, but she did. She'd been having strange dreams filled with sadness and tears. Then it got quiet. No tube blaring away, no dishes clinking in the kitchen, no water in the pipes, no Vernon loudly hunting for toys. No noise at all. It was too quiet. And so Holly woke up. She opened her eyes. Where was she? She was in a bed, but this wasn't her room. It was too bare. The walls were white. There were no posters, no stuffed animals. It had to be a hospital of some sort. There was a sign posted on the wall outside across from her room. She could see the sign through the door window. It said, "Quiet Muggle Ward." Wards were in hospitals. She knew that. But what was a Muggle? And where were her parents? Usually Mum or Dad went with her on doctor visits. "Hello," said a quiet voice next to her. Holly turned and looked at the source of the voice. There was a man sitting in a chair next to her. He was kind of thin. He wore glasses and had untidy black hair with sprinkles of gray in it. There was a small zigzaggy scar on his forehead. He looked nice enough, but she didn't know him. "My name is Harry Potter," the man said. "I'm your cousin, on your father's side." "I didn't know Dad had any cousins." The man smiled briefly. "Well, we haven't talked in a long while. But your grandmother on your father's side and my mum were sisters," he said. "You were really, really sick," he continued, "and your dad asked me to take you to the hospital to get better." "Was I? I don't remember." Holly's voice trailed off. What did she remember? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. A stout brunette woman wearing a nurse's cap came bustling in. "Ah," she said cheerfully, "we're finally awake. You almost slept the morning away." She pulled out a dark purple bottle and a spoon. "Time for your medicine," she chirped. She poured some milky lavender liquid into a large spoon. It sparkled and fizzed in the light. "Drink up, dear," she said, and held the spoon to Holly's lips. Holly obediently swallowed. "Good girl. Now you just relax a bit and I'll be back with your meal." She swished out of the room, leaving Holly alone again with Mr. Potter. "What did it taste like?" asked Mr. Potter curiously. Holly thought a moment. "It tasted a bit like lemon custard," she answered. She'd never heard of medicine tasting good. "What's it do?" "You really want to know?" Holly nodded. Mr. Potter rummaged around in a coat pocket. He brought out a very large, very sharp-looking pin. Holly's green eyes grew large. Mr. Potter held up the pin. "Watch this," he announced. Holly watched. Mr. Potter quickly thrust the pin over his other hand and stabbed himself in the thumb. Holly immediately flinched. She could see a drop of blood welling up from the pinprick. "Did that hurt?" he asked. Holly thought. No, it hadn't. A wide smile of incredulity spread over her face. "How did you know?" she asked, beaming. "I didn't," answered Mr. Potter, rubbing the blood off his thumb. "The doctor knew." Mr. Potter leaned forward and whispered conspiratorially to Holly. "He's a very good doctor." "He must be," agreed Holly happily. "No one else figured it out." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Mr. Potter asked gently. Holly was silent, thinking. Mr. Potter waited patiently. Finally, Holly spoke. "When my best friend Jessica fell and scraped her knee," began Holly hesitantly, "it hurt me so bad that I started to cry too. She thought I was making fun of her and didn't believe me when I told her why I was crying. The next day she wasn't my best friend anymore." Mr. Potter nodded his head sympathetically. "Once," Holly continued, "when I was at school, I had the most fierce headache. It was in the middle of an exam. I thought I would die. They sent me to the office. Of course I got all better, but then nobody believed I'd been hurting in the first place. I got into terrible trouble for fibbing. The exam, you know. And when I got back to the classroom, the headache came back. It was just awful." Holly sniffed. Harry nodded, listening. "I told my mum what happened at school. She believed me and took me to the doctors. By then I had all sorts of other horrible feelings, and I told the doctor and they listened and gave me all sorts of tests, but they couldn't find anything." Uh-huh, encouraged Mr. Potter. Why didn't you tell your parents? He inquired gently. Holly thought some more. Mom and Dad, she began, they're pretty straight. They don't much like when people are, different. And they don't go for the mysterious stuff either. When Vernon broke his arm, Holly continued, I sobbed with him all the way to the hospital. Mom and Dad thought it was so sweet that I loved my brother so much that I was crying when he got hurt. Dad always says there's a reason for everything. You just have to find it, he says. And I could never find a proper reason. It was easier to keep quiet, stay away from others, and keep to myself, she concluded miserably. I see, said Mr. Potter kindly. Well, I think we have a reason now. You were very, very sick, young lady. You almost died. Did I? Holly lifted her hand and looked at it. It was terribly bony. Pale blue veins stood out vividly. Tell me about this last time, Holly, Mr. Potter queried gently. What is the last thing you remember? Holly thought, still studying her hand. Right after school got out and the summer holidays began, I got to feeling terribly sad, Holly said. I wanted to cry all the time. And then, one day, we had just gotten back from a picnic at the beach for my birthday. I was ever so sad, and I got weak and tired and didn't want to do anything at all. At that moment, the nurse returned with a tray loaded with food. All right, my dear, she announced cheerfully. Are we hungry? Holly thought. Yes, I am, she replied eagerly. Well, continued the nurse with a wide smile, we have plenty of food for you to choose from and enough for you too, Mr. Potter, to join in. But first, she said, looking directly at Holly, you have to take your pills. It's a special body-building pill. She handed Holly 2 large pills. They were dark green with yellow specks throughout. Chew these, she commanded. Harry leaned over to Holly. Kind of like super vitamins, he whispered in her ear. Holly giggled. They were much more than that, but Holly didn't need to know. I wonder what they'll taste like, he added. Holly chewed. Strawberries, she announced with pleasure. When she finished her pills, the 2 of them began to eat. There was ever so many foods to choose between. Hot biscuits and jam, scones, meat pie, kippers, roast chicken, shepherd's pie, apple pie, pumpkin pasties, custard, chicken soup, mutton stew, milk, juice, pudding. However did the nurse fit it all on the tray? Holly did most of the eating. She was really very hungry. Mr. Potter joined in too, but spoke more than he ate. He also carried on a lively conversation by himself, discussing the merits of a shepherd's pie to a basic meat pie, and whether or not a custard tasted better than pudding. When Holly had eaten her fill, she yawned. Are you sleepy? Asked Mr. Potter. A little. Then you should rest. Rest is the best thing to do after you've been sick. Holly did not argue. Rest sounded like a good idea. I have some errands to run, said Mr. Potter, so I will leave you for now and let you sleep. But here is a gift for you when you wake. He pulled out a small, slim volume bound by a single pink bow. It can get kind of boring waiting in a hospital, he said, handing the book to Holly. It's a book of fairy tales for you to read. Do you like fairy tales? Holly smiled. Oh, yes, I do. She took the volume and read the title. It said, The Tales of Beetle the Bard. Thank you very much, she said, and tucked the book under her covers for later use. Then she closed her eyes and was soon fast asleep. Harry Potter watched her sleeping form a few minutes, listening to her steady, even breathing. The beginning of summer holidays, June, he mused. A trip to the beach, birthday in July. That gives me a place to start. He picked up the food tray and took it with him as he left Holly's room. He had a lot to get done, and not much time. Mr. Potter wasn't there when Holly woke, but there was a huge meal on a tray waiting for her to eat. There were another 2 body-building pills to take also. They're a mild muscle grower and flesh replacement pill, Healer Winonan had told Harry. They'll make her strong enough to travel and take off a couple weeks on her recovery time, yet her growth won't be so rapid as to affect normal body development. The body-building pills tasted like peaches this time. I must remember to tell Mr. Potter about them, thought Holly, as she happily ate much of the food placed before her. When finished, her food tray was whisked away by another nurse, and Holly read a couple pages of her new book before she fell fast asleep. Mr. Potter joined Holly for supper when she awoke that evening. Holly was amazed at how hungry she always was. "That's because you haven't eaten in such a long time," explained Mr. Potter while she ate. The bodybuilding pills were peanut-flavored this time. "Your body's trying to make up for lost time." And indeed, when Holly looked at her hands, they didn't look nearly so skinny and bony as before. Or was she just getting used to their looks? After dinner, Mr. Potter pulled out a couple of packages for Holly. It was a new set of clothes, a pretty blue dress, shoes, socks, everything. "I hope they fit," he exclaimed when he showed them to her. "You're going home tomorrow, and we can't have you traveling in your nightgown now, can we?" "No," agreed Holly. "That wouldn't do." But then she was sleepy again, so Mr. Potter placed the new clothes on a nearby counter and tucked her in. Later, during the middle of the night, Holly woke again. There was a tray of hot chocolate, milk, bread, jam, crackers waiting for her, and another set of bodybuilding pills, peppermint-flavored. Holly polished off all the food and went promptly back to sleep. After a huge breakfast in the morning, bacon-flavored bodybuilding pills this time, and more purple, sparkly stuff, the nurse brushed out Holly's long blonde hair. She gathered the top part together, pulling it back, and used Holly's new blue butterfly-shaped barrette to keep it in place. Afterwards, she helped Holly get into her new clothes. They fit perfectly, but Holly was amazed at how dizzy she felt when she tried to stand up. "Don't you worry yourself none," the nurse assured Holly. "That dizziness will soon pass and you'll feel right as rain." She was right, but Holly felt ever so shaky when she took her first steps. "That'll pass too," assured the nurse, "once your legs remember how to do it. Mind you, though, you mustn't overdo it. The moment you start to feel a bit tired, you need to take a rest, understand?" "Yes, ma'am," promised Holly solemnly. Mr. Potter returned just as Holly was finishing her morning snack, carrot-flavored pills. Yuck! "Are we ready to leave?" he asked cheerfully. "Yes, sir," responded Holly happily. Already she missed her parents. She put her hand in his, said goodbye to the nurse, and the two walked out of her room, down the hall, and out the door to its end. There was a sidewalk and a busy street on the other side. A taxi waited for them. Mr. Potter helped Holly into the vehicle and then got in beside her. The taxi took off immediately, and soon they were at the station. At the station, Mr. Potter pulled out some tickets, and they quickly boarded, finding an empty compartment. By this time, Holly was feeling pretty tired, so she curled up on the couch and went fast to sleep. "Wake up, Holly," Harry said as he shook her gently. "It's time to get off." Holly sat up and rubbed her bleary eyes. "Are we there already?" she asked. "That's right," answered Harry. "Come on, your dad will be waiting for us at the station." Holly scrambled to her feet and followed Mr. Potter off the train. "Dad!" squealed Holly when she spotted him in the crowd. She flew from Harry's grasp into Dudley's arms for a great big hug. Harry could almost see the tension melt away from Dudley as he wrapped his arms around her. Dudley's eyes found Harry's, and he mouthed a heartfelt thank you. Harry nodded back in acknowledgement. He would have left them alone then and gone on home, but Harry had business to take care of with Dudley and his family. So Harry followed the two into the car. Dudley drove them all to his home. Holly filled the car with excited chatter. "I got a new dress, Dad. Do you like it? And new shoes, too. Do you like them?" "Yes, dear," replied Dudley, more interested in driving than her new dress and shoes. "And a book, see? And they had this purple medicine that tasted like lemon custard. Have you ever heard of such a thing?" "No, dear." "And then there were these pills. The first time I ate them, they tasted like strawberries. But the next time, I think they tasted like peaches. How can the same pill have more than one flavor, Dad?" "I don't know, dear." "Anyway, they tasted different every time I had them, and the last time I had them, they tasted like carrots. That was pretty bad, Dad. I don't think pills should taste like carrots. Do you, Dad?" "No, dear." "I wouldn't have eaten them had they known they were going to taste like carrots, Dad. Would you?" "No, dear." Dudley looked relieved when they pulled into their driveway. Mrs. Wycliffe, Laurel, was waiting for them outside the front door. "Mum!" shouted Holly with delight. She flew out of the car and raced to hug Laurel. She responded with a happy hug that swept Holly off her feet and in a big circle. "I missed you so much," said Holly. "I missed you too," Laurel whispered in her ear. There were tears in her eyes as she looked at Harry. "I'm hungry, Mum. Can I go inside to get something to eat?" "Of course, dear," replied Laurel, setting Holly down. "Go on inside and get something." Holly raced inside the house, leaving Harry, Dudley, and Laurel outside together. Laurel stood up and faced Harry. Her clothes were clean and neat today. Her hair was neatly pinned up. There were no circles under her eyes, and she wore a touch of makeup. She looked like a new person altogether, but there was still the fire in her eyes. Laurel took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Potter," she began, looking at him directly in the eyes. "The last time you were here, I forgot my manners. Things were said that shouldn't have been." Laurel cleared her throat and then continued, "We can never thank you enough for what you have done. You will always be welcome in our home." Harry looked directly back at her and gave a short bow. "Given the circumstances of our last meeting," he replied quietly, "your behavior was quite understandable. There is no need for an apology." Harry waited to see what would happen next. Dudley shifted his feet uncomfortably, waiting also. Laurel relaxed a bit, put on a brave smile, and offered her hand to Harry. "Won't you come inside for a spot of tea?" Harry took her hand gently in his for a moment before releasing it and smiling in return. "I would like that very much," he said. The three of them walked inside. Harry and Dudley sat down across from each other while they waited for Laurel to bring the tea. Holly had found some milk and bread and was sitting in the corner eating quietly. Dudley looked over at her. "It's amazing how much better she is now," he said. "Yes," agreed Harry, looking over at Holly too. She was still painfully thin, but no longer the skeletal featherweight she had been 2 days earlier. Laurel returned with a tray of tea and scones, freshly baked by the smell of it. The tea and scones were rapidly served, and then silence settled over the group while the food was consumed. An aura of expectancy hovered in the air. At last Harry placed his cup and saucer down and cleared his throat. It was his turn to talk. "First of all," Harry began, "I owe you," he directed his look at Dudley, "a huge apology. A mistake has been made, a terrible, almost tragic mistake. Had you not contacted me, we would have never had the chance to rectify it." Holly, indeed, should have received a letter when she turned 11. At this, Dudley sat back. It was the news he had both suspected and dreaded to hear, ever since he learned that Holly had made a complete recovery at that hospital. "Let me get this straight," started Laurel, putting down her cup and saucer. "Are you telling me that Holly is an empath?" interrupted Harry quickly, before Laurel could say the dreaded W word. He was relieved to note that Dudley had at least explained something of their youth and of Harry's world. That made things easier, much easier. And a rather gifted one at that. "When you are sad," he explained, "Holly feels sad. When you cut your finger, Holly feels the pain of that cut. All those trips to the doctors and those ever-crazy changing symptoms," Holly kept describing. She wasn't lying. She was feeling the pain of the other patients in the room as if they were her own pain. "Holly," he said, turning his head to look at her. They all looked at Holly. Holly had finished the milk and bread and was now munching on a piece of chicken. "Holly," continued Harry, "is now taking some medicine that blocks outside feelings." "I don't understand," said Laurel. "Look at us. We're not starving or wasting away." Harry nodded in agreement. "I've made some inquiries into that," he began, pulling out a small notebook. It was purely for appearance sake. Harry knew all this by heart. "Your next-door neighbor," he consulted his notebook, "a Mrs. Judith Rogers, has had some difficult decisions to make this summer. Her beloved mother has been fighting a long and painful battle with cancer. It has been a losing fight." Harry looked up from his notebook. Holly reported that when she came home for the summer holidays, she began to feel incredibly sad. Harry tipped his head down, as if again referring to his notebook, and continued. "Later, in mid-July, Mrs. Rogers decided to bring her mother home from the hospital so she could die in her own bed, surrounded by loving family and friends. I'm guessing that is around the time you came back from a beach trip, after which Holly reported that she felt ever so weak and tired. She doesn't remember much after that," Harry concluded, putting away his notebook. Just then the front door burst open, and Vernon came charging in. "Hey, Mum, Dad," he shouted. "Guess what? Remember all those cars crowded around the neighbor's house yesterday? Well, there's a hearse out there now. Some lady died over there." He disappeared into his bedroom, only to reappear momentarily carrying a camera. "I'm going to take photos of the body as they carry it away." Gotta hurry. See ya." With that, he vanished out the house, forgetting to even close the front door. Both Dudley and Laurel's face were ashen as they turned to look back at Harry. "If she had been," whispered Dudley. He tried again. "If Holly had been here when that lady died, would Holly have "I don't know," responded Harry quietly. "I honestly don't know. She could have bounced back afterwards, or not," he finished lamely. Actually, Mrs. McGee, the mother, had died at 3:14 a.m., the morning before yesterday. She had died around the time Harry was calling Dudley to tell him that Holly was going to be all right. Harry had spent part of the time this morning with the McGee, Roger's family, asking questions and making his condolences. The body had been kept in the house an extra day for viewing purposes before its removal. Privately, Harry didn't think Holly would have been able to bounce back. He shuddered to think what would have happened had Mrs. McGee died any earlier. "But," sputtered Dudley, "how could this have happened?" His relief at Holly's recovery replaced by growing anger at the thought of how close Holly had come to dying. "How could your lot have missed? How could they have screwed up so?" His voice got louder and he rose up from his seat threateningly. It was not that he wanted Holly to have received a letter. That would have been bad enough. But given the alternative and the pain they had gone through all summer, a letter might have been preferable. "I'm afraid that's probably my fault too," answered Harry. "And I am ever so sorry for that," he added softly. "What?" Dudley sat back down. It was not the answer he had expected. Harry picked up his cup of tea and took a sip. This was the part he had been dreading. Harry set the cup back down. Oh, well, best get it over with. "I don't know how much your parents told you about my problems," he began hesitantly, talking to Dudley. "Or how much he told you, for that matter," he added, looking at Laurel. "But when Dylan," he'd gotten Dudley's new name from a letter in the mailbox, "and I last parted company, things were pretty scary. I had this very nasty, very powerful person named Lord Voldemort trying to kill me. My friends were doing all they could to keep me alive. We didn't know how it would turn out, or if we would even live to see the next day. And some of them hadn't." As he spoke, he could see the faces of friends long gone, Tonks, Remus, Mad-Eye, Fred, and the others, as if it were yesterday, and he felt anew the grief at their loss. Harry forced those memories aside and continued. "We did know that Lord Voldemort would not hesitate to use my family and friends against me. That put you and your parents in danger, Dylan. So my friends did what they could to protect you. You went into hiding. They gave you new identities and a new life. I knew they had done that for you. They didn't give me any of the details because, unfortunately, Lord Voldemort might have been able to get that information from my mind. So I only knew you were made safe. But besides a new life, they apparently did even more to try to protect you. They cast every spell they could think of to ensure you would not be found. They made those spells as strong as possible because Lord Voldemort was a very powerful wizard. Then I think they turned their wands upon each other and cast spells that would make them forget about you, your family, and what they had done." Harry had spent considerable time last night with Daedalus Diggle concerning his aunt and uncle. Daedalus denied having ever met them, let alone driven them off into a new location. No amount of prodding on Harry's part changed that. They were desperate times, Harry reflected softly. No one was safe from Lord Voldemort. Harry took another sip of tea and returned the cup to the saucer. "My friends succeeded in protecting you from Lord Voldemort," he concluded. "They made sure you could not be found. They apparently made you invisible to the whole wizarding world as well." Harry looked directly at Dudley. "I didn't go looking for you and your family after it was all over, because I thought you wouldn't want it. Because of the protection my friends gave you, I couldn't have found you had I tried." Dudley sat still a moment, trying to take it all in. Finally he spoke. "But what does all this have to do with Holly?" Harry thought for a moment. "I am guessing," he said finally, "that the protection and invisibility given to you and your parents extended to your own family. Even now those spells remain unbroken. Had you not gone looking for me, we would have never learned about Holly. For that I am deeply indebted to you." "What now?" asked Laurel, breaking the silence that followed. Harry was grateful she had changed the topic. Now we get Holly into Hogwarts as soon as possible. Hogwarts! Sputtered Dudley. Yes, Hogwarts. I know how you probably feel about Hogwarts, Dylan, said Harry. But Holly has to learn to control her talent. Hogwarts is the only place I know that can teach her. But she's got the medicine. The medicine works for now, but with continued use, Holly will develop an immunity to it. One day, Holly will wake up and everyone else's emotions will come flooding in again. She has got to learn how to block those outside emotions before they overwhelm her like they did this summer. We may not be so fortunate the next time. Hello? Is anybody in? Everyone looked towards the open door. A plump head with a bowler hat appeared poking through the door. Oh, yes, I see there is. Without invitation, the person stepped all the way into the house. He was a short, fat man wearing a blue tweed suit. He pulled out a business card from his wallet. My name is Filbert Fitchley, he said, walking further inside the house to hand his card to Dudley. And you are Mr. Wycliffe, yes? Dudley did not disagree as he took the card. And you are Mrs. Wycliffe, yes? Of course you are, Fitchley said, handing her a card too. He gave a third card to Harry for good measures. I work for the Puddinghampton School District. Your lovely wife, Fitchley continued, talking again to Dudley, called a few days ago to report that young Holly was bedridden and would be unable to attend school for a while. I thought I'd stop by to see how she was doing. He glanced around the room. His eyes lit up when he spotted Holly. Is that your daughter Holly over there? He asked, walking over to her. Holly was now eating a piece of chocolate cake and had had 2 scoops of vanilla ice cream on top. She looked at him silently, her mouth full of cake. Of course you must be. Mr. Fitchley peered into Holly's green eyes. My, he said, you don't look bedridden at all, do you? But you do look very, very skinny. Have your parents been starving you? What? Are you crazy? Asked Dudley. Look at her eating. So I see, mused Mr. Fitchley, still staring intently at Holly. Holly looked down and took another bite. A stray strand of blonde hair fell forward as she ate. Holly reached up with both hands and readjusted her butterfly barrette and then continued eating. But as she is obviously not bedridden, it makes me wonder exactly why your wife called. What do you mean? Asked Laurel defensively. Are you saying I lied? Holly was sick, very sick when I called. More like dying, I think, was the way you put it, said Mr. Fitchley, still watching Holly intently. If that were true, and I would never say you were lying, then Miss Holly has made a most rapid recovery. Miraculous indeed. What are you saying? Asked Dudley. Nothing, he sighed, turning his face to the parents. But given the high number of absences from school Holly has had throughout the years, none of them, I might add, with a physician's note, and looking at how skinny she is now, one has to wonder. Wonder what? Said Dylan, his voice rising. Are you accusing us of something? Excuse me, interrupted Harry calmly, breaking the tension in the room, but are you really from Holly's school, Puddinghampton School? Yes, Mr. Fitchley was disconcerted by the change in topic. Excellent, Harry smiled, as if most pleased by this information. I wonder if you could do a small favor for me. What? Miss Holly here has indeed been very sick, though perhaps not on death's doorstep. Harry smiled again, lightly, as if having made a small joke. Her parents and I have been discussing Holly's future. Holly has been invited to attend the most prestigious institution of Hogwarts up north of here. Besides having an excellent educational program with a wide variety of subjects from which to choose, continued Harry smoothly, the staff at Hogwarts is thoroughly equipped to handle Holly's medical problems, so they won't interfere with her academic learning. I wonder if you would be so good as to forward a copy of Holly's academic records to Hogwarts. Harry handed Mr. Fitchley a business card, Fitchley's own, with new writing on it. Harry had hastily rewritten it while the rest had been talking. It bore the name Hogwarts, School for Young Students with Exceptionally Gifted Minds. The address followed, but it was false. The writing on the card would return to its original lettering, bearing Fitchley's name after an hour. Hogwarts needed no transfer papers. Said Mr. Fitchley uncertainly, while studying the card. I can do that. Thank you so much, said Harry. I would appreciate it if you could get on that right away. Harry nodded to the door as if dismissing Mr. Fitchley. Having her records would speed up the transfer process ever so much. You understand. Yes, I do, mumbled Finchley, returning to leave. He looked disappointed, as if he'd been all set to launch an abusive child investigation. And now? Thank you so much for coming today, added Harry, while Mr. Finchley walked out the doorway. Goodbye, Harry called out as the door shut behind Mr. Finchley. Harry turned immediately back to the parents. As you probably know, he stated, Hogwarts has already begun this year's term. It is unusual for students to enter late, but this is a special situation. I have already talked to the headmistress, and she has agreed to permit a late admission in Holly's case. But we have to get her to school as soon as possible so Holly doesn't miss much instruction. But Holly is so young, protested Laurel. She's never been away from home for long. You would rather she attend the Puddinghampton school with Mr. Finchley? Countered Harry. Well, no, admitted Laurel to herself. He had been unpleasant. But, Mummy, interrupted Holly, I want to go. Everyone turned to look at her. She had finished the cake and was now holding up a partially eaten carrot stick. These people made me feel all better when nobody else could. Maybe they can help me stay that way. Laurel walked over to Holly. She knelt down in front of her and looked at Holly in the eyes. You sure, baby? She asked. You'll be all alone there. She won't be alone, interrupted Harry. I have 2 sons attending Hogwarts. The youngest, Albus, is Holly's age. They'll look after her. Dudley stared at Harry. It never occurred to him that Harry might have a family. Dudley wavered. He looked at Holly. You sure? He asked. Holly nodded. I'd like to give it a try, she said. Then it's settled, announced Harry quickly, not giving anyone a chance to continue the discussion. I'll take Holly back to London tonight. She'll spend the night in our house there. She can shop for her school supplies tomorrow morning and be off for Hogwarts by the end of the day. Harry wanted to get Holly to Hogwarts before Dudley had a chance to change his mind. School supplies. How much did everything cost? Dudley had no idea. Harry, how much money? I mean, we haven't budgeted for... That's all been taken into account, replied Harry smoothly. Of course you had no idea about Hogwarts and no chance to plan ahead. My wife and I have already discussed this. Actually, they hadn't really discussed it. There had been no need. Holly is family. We'd be happy to take care of Holly's expenses while at school. It's the least I can do, he hesitated, to make up for all the problems I have caused you. I'm hungry, Mum, Holly piped up, having finished her carrot. When's dinner? Dudley and Laurel looked down at Holly. They looked at the pile of empty dishes on the kitchen table, and then they looked at Harry. Harry shrugged self-consciously. That'll wear off in a while, he mumbled. Then he bent down to talk to Holly. Holly, dear, he said, I know you're hungry, but you need to get some rest. Why don't you go to your room and take a nap? When you wake, your mom will have your big dinner waiting for you. Holly nodded. Okay, she said, and trotted off to her room to take a nap. Harry turned to Laurel and spoke. You can pack her things while she is sleeping. I'll fetch some dinner from... He glanced at Dudley. What are the kids like? Fish and chips? Dudley nodded distractedly. Yeah, sure, they like that, he replied, still not sure about letting Holly go to Hogwarts in the first place. I'll fetch some fish and chips so you won't have to cook, continued Harry, addressing Laurel. And then I'll take Holly back to London right after dinner, okay? Harry quickly left the house before Dudley could disagree. There was much to do. Among other things, he had to get some more Muggle money and let Ginny know company would be coming.